Many of us right now are living in difficult times. Well, life is full of difficult times, whether it be right now with a coronavirus pandemic or all the other stuff that we have to face all the time, whether that be aging, difficulties in our job, difficulties in relationships, even death. Human life is about facing challenges. But today I want to talk to everybody, particularly in the context of what we're collectively facing right now, particularly in Shanghai, about how we get through painful experiences. And in order to illustrate that, I want to tell a short story that's very famous in Buddhism. And it's a story of the two arrows. Essentially, this talks about a man who gets shot by an arrow and he pulls out that arrow. And then the Buddha asks him, if you were shot by a second arrow, would it be more or less painful? And the guy goes, obviously, a lot more painful. And the Buddha then seeks to draw an analogy. He says that the first arrow represents the stuff that we must all bear. We cannot avoid it. We will all get shot with the first arrow because being human is about, on occasion, suffering, whether it be now or other events. The second arrow, however, he said, was self-caused. The second arrow is our reaction to the first arrow, the reaction to events. When bad things happen, when we experience pain in whatever form it might come, a typical human reaction is one of anger, frustration, anxiety, guilt, a whole plethora of negative emotions, which many of us indeed might be feeling right now, particularly when the situation seems beyond our control. And to the Buddha, he is saying that, well, you're in the painful situation anyway. You got shot by the first arrow, it hurts. But the second arrow is something that's entirely under your control. In other words, pain is inevitable, but suffering is something that you can control. You can control your reaction to painful events. Now, it's all very well me saying that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And you might be thinking, yeah, that is a great phrase, but like in practice, how do I do it? And for me personally, I guess I want to give you three things that I latch onto in order to actually realize less suffering in painful circumstances. I can't promise that you won't suffer at all, but these are three things that I use. The first is something that my old grandfather used to say, which is you need to play with the hand or the cards you're dealt, not the cards you wish you were given. In other words, we are where we are. The situation is as it is. At the minute, it's difficult to control. In such a case, we have two options. We can either be upset that our present life is far from what our optimal life would be, and we are upset about that gap. Or we can accept that it is definitely going to be less optimal and try and make the best out of the situation and look for positives where we can. Now, for some people, particularly those who are particularly badly affected by the pandemic, I appreciate this will be difficult. But for the majority of us right now, what we're experiencing is frustration, anxiety, and those kinds of emotions. And in that situation, we have to try and look for positives where we can. For example, I no longer have to commute to work, of course, which has freed up quite a substantial amount of my day, which I've used to read books, in fact, about Chinese history, which I've always been very, very interested in. And other people in other stuff, they're kind of working out at home, they're taking up yoga or whatever. You know, this weekend, you might have gone out to see your friends. Obviously, many of us can't. But maybe then you can learn a new skill, learn a musical instrument, I don't know, or read books or whatever. And maybe it's not what you most want to do, but it is something. It's something you can be positive about, hang your hat on, instead of just being upset that you can't do what you absolutely, optimally would do. The second thing that I would emphasize is, I guess, the emotion of compassion over the negative emotions. And that's both to yourself and to other people. So an example for me, yesterday evening, I was feeling, I have to admit, a little bit anxious about the situation. But instead of ruminating on that and letting it ruin my evening, instead I called my parents, who are obviously worried about me, and tried to reassure them. In other words, I gave what I lacked. And through the process of reassuring them, I actually found I reassured myself a fair amount. That's what I mean. Give what you feel you are missing. And the third, I think, and most important thing to realize is something I've talked about before, and that's the principle of this too shall pass. Events in human lives are a little bit like clouds moving across the sky. Sometimes there are big clouds, big events, things that really aren't great, but you know that they will gradually move away. Everything that has a beginning also has an end. The pandemic has an end. Your suffering will have an end. You can and will get through this. And so for everybody watching this video, I hope you stay safe. No matter where you are and what you're doing, I hope you also do your best to avoid the second arrow, and 我们一起加油吧。